consequences. As if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of S-294 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The Senator from Hawaii.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. The majority of the minors who become pregnant tell their parents about the pregnancy even when they plan to seek an abortion. But it's not always possible or even advisable that a parent be informed. For some minors, telling their parents that they are sexually active, let alone pregnant, can lead to physical abuse. It can lead to these minors being thrown out of their homes. One study found that 45% of young people who did not seek advice from their parents about a pregnancy experienced significant negative consequences, such as punishment, abuse, being forced out of their home when their parents found out. By requiring that parents of minors seeking an abortion be notified and setting the bar for an exception to this rule at a nearly insurmountable level, this bill ignores this reality of what might happen to these young people. In doing so, it turns an already difficult decision for a young person into an almost impossible one. It puts minors' health and safety at risk while doing nothing to strengthen families. This is made clear by the fact that all of the major medical organizations, including the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Society for Adolescent Medicine, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and the American Public Health Association, all of these groups oppose laws like this one that mandate parental involvement in minors' abortion decisions. So let's be clear. This is yet another partisan, mainly partisan attack on a woman's constitutionally protected right to choose. It is completely unnecessary and distracts from the important work the Senate is doing right now to deliver urgently needed COVID relief. For these reasons, I object.
Objection is heard.
Two more quick ones on Afghanistan.
Oh yeah, can I do Owen first and then I'll come right back to you? Okay, go ahead, Owen.
Jen, thank you. Back to Title 10, if I may. So today, as you well know, the Biden administration and HHS started the reversal of the Trump administration's ban on abortion referrals at Title 10 family planning clinics. So my first question, why does the Biden administration insist that pro-life Americans pay for abortions and violate their conscience?
Well, first, that's not an accurate depiction of what happened. So let me, and I know we want to be accurate around here, none of the funds appropriated under this title shall be used in programs where abortion is a method of family planning. That is written into the Public Health Service Act, and it specifically states that.
But we know there's indirect subsidies, money that's fungible, that can't be traced. We know that. Come on.
That is not how it works. That is the law. So I'm stating what the law is and how it is implemented legally by these organizations. And the reason since you gave me the opportunity, the reason why the president took these steps is because he believes that advancing equity for all, including people of color and others who have been historically underserved, marginalized, and adversely affected by persistent poverty and inequality, can be helped by these actions. And by focusing on advancing equity in the Title X program, we can create opportunities for the improvement of communities that have been historically underserved, which benefits everyone. That's how these fundings are used in communities.
You talk about equity, if I may interrupt. Mm-hmm. How is it equity? How is it fighting systemic racism when abortion, we well know, disproportionately affects minority children?
Again, funding cannot be used from this for abortion, but access to health care, access to healthcare in communities that have been marginalized, underserved, adversely affected by persistent poverty is always going to be something the president fights for. Okay, I think I've answered your question. Alex, go ahead.
On Afghanistan,
Very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm really sorry that we have reached this day here. I remember the time well when abortion was essentially illegal in the United States. I know of women who have ended their lives. I saw, the plate being passed at Stanford where I lived, so a woman could go to Mexico for her abortion. And nearly 50 years after the Supreme Court guaranteed the right to safe and legal abortion, it's still unfortunate that women's reproductive rights are considered an issue that's up for debate. I believe that deeply. So far, in 2021, state lawmakers across the country have introduced 561 abortion restriction bills in state legislatures. 83 of those have been signed into law. The state Supreme Court agreed to hear a case about Mississippi's restricted abortion law. Many observers, including myself, are concerned that the Supreme Court could use this case to overturn or diminish the protections established in Roe. Let me ask Dr. Parrott a question. Texas recently passed a law that would ban all abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Is there any medical justification for a law like this, which would limit the flexibility of a patient and her doctor to make the healthcare decisions that are best for the patient?
Thank you for that question. That's an easy answer. The answer is no. None of these restrictions are based in any medical evidence at all. They're not based in any science, and they absolutely do not protect the health and safety of the folks that are seeking care. The idea that they would do so is not supported by the medical evidence, and as I mentioned in my written and my oral testimony, it actually does the opposite. It makes care less safe. It increases the risk of complications during pregnancy and decreases the likelihood that individuals will be able to go on to live lives that are productive and safe and healthy and allow them to be well.
Well, this year, if I could ask another question. This year alone, 16 states have enacted 83 abortion restrictions. These new laws impact 58% of women in the United States from ages 13 to 44. These restrictions that vary by state mean that a woman's access to safe reproductive health care is largely dependent on her zip code. I'm just amazed at this, Dr. Parrott. As a provider, how do you see these inconsistencies across states impact women you treat?
Too many people, unfortunately, lack access to essential healthcare services, including abortion care. We know, as Professor Goodwin mentioned, that the same states that are enacting these restrictions on abortion access have the worst records in reproductive health and well-being for the folks in their own states. It has a direct impact. I provide care in the Washington, D.C. area that includes Maryland and Virginia, and the legislation across those states are vastly different, even though the actual geography is not that far apart. And so what that means, if you live in Virginia, if you live in Maryland, if you live in the district, your experience of accessing abortion care, this constitutionally protected right, is going to be extremely different and solely based on your zip code. You are absolutely right. And so it has devastating impacts on agency, on autonomy, on self-determination for the community that I care for. I grew up here in DC and I practice here by intention because I believe that the community that raised me, that made me, absolutely deserves access to the same health care that anyone else would be able to provide, and have it done so in a way that is compassionate, caring, community grounded, and grounded deeply in principles of justice and equity.
It's my understanding that, well, I think I asked you that question. Let me go to one other question. Last month, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a case that could dramatically change a woman's access to reproductive health care. Several states have trigger laws in place that would impose abortion bans if Roe is overturned. Dr. Goodwin, how could the Supreme Court decision alter a woman's access in this regard?
The unfortunate times that you have mentioned are upon us today. It's important to recognize that there has long been bipartisan support for abortion rights. Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 opinion written by Justice Blackmun. 5 of the 7 justices at that time were Republican appointed. Prescott Bush, who was treasurer of Planned Parenthood, the father of George Bush, won. When you think about where the Supreme Court is today, it means that Roe is vulnerable, and it's vulnerable by a death by 1,000 strikes. These laws, which you have mentioned, have been a proliferation as an attempt to do away with abortion rights, but it's been a euphemistic football for political gerrymandering with regard to abortion rights. What WIPA does is it protects all people across the country, regardless of their race, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of their zip code, in being able to receive fundamental health care, which this is. And I want to make one other point, which is that the World Health Organization has long established that an abortion is as safe as a penicillin shot. So we should really begin there. What is the purpose of this legislating when we know that these are safe procedures and individuals should not be denied access to this health care simply because of the state in which they live? And these trigger laws disproportionately affect poor women, poor people who have the potential to become pregnant, and that is unconstitutional.
Well, thank you very much. I think you made a very good case, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Feinstein. Thanks for being here today. I'd like to turn to towing. A number of our colleagues will be joining us, and we are in the middle of votes right now, so we probably will have to take a short recess at some point within the next few minutes. But I do want to thank Tom.
Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulate the gentlewoman on presenting her first bill as a cardinal on the Appropriations Committee. This is a long time coming, and it's a pleasure to work with you. The bill invests in health and upholds American global values abroad. The FY22 State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill, in a historic move, removes the Helms Amendment, which has prohibited safe abortions and health care services for poor and vulnerable women in low-income countries for decades. That is a significant decision and one that enables access to health care for millions of women across the globe. I'm pleased that this bill includes language to support countries like Colombia, who have welcomed Venezuelans fleeing the humanitarian crisis. And it also funds pro-democracy and human rights programs in Venezuela as well as in Cuba. This funding is critical to ensure access to broadcasting and the internet in Cuba. These platforms will provide support to the Cuban people as they struggle for freedom and true self-governance. Finally, this bill continues support for the critical U.S.-Israel partnership by fully funding U.S. security assistance to Israel and cooperative missile defense programs. Ensuring that Israel maintains her qualitative military edge is essential for stability in the Middle East and our own national security. And I truly thank Chairwoman Lee for working closely with me and others on this bill. This is, as we always say in the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Speaker, the spending decisions that we make are an expression of our values, and this bill telegraphs that expression of our values, of America's values, and the strength that we have at the same time providing us the ability to provide assistance to millions of vulnerable people across the globe. And I am proud to support it and to work with Chairwoman Lee going forward so we can see it become law. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserved.
Just a few here. Most of the Texas-related questions have been asked. We're curious, what advice would the president give to a woman in Texas right now who wants or needs to get an abortion?
What the president would convey to any woman who is trying to get an abortion, seek an abortion, be able to employ her constitutional right to seek health care and health care that is enshrined and allowed by federal law. What he would convey to them, I don't think he's going to be giving medical advice. That's not the role of any president. He would say, but I would say he would convey to them, I have asked my team to use every lever at their disposal to ensure you have this right, to ensure you have access, to ensure that you can have the ability to seek medical care in the way that every woman should have the right to across the country. And he has made that a priority.
And this request of DOJ and HHS for what more can we do, is the understanding or the expectation that they will actually come back with specific ideas, or is it possible that they determine there really isn't much beyond making sure somebody takes this to the Supreme Court? Because the federal government can't be subject to a civil suit in Texas. But there are other things potentially the federal government would be able to do?
The president has every hope, expectation that the leaders of agencies across the government who have capacity will seek every way they can, every means they can to protect a woman's right to choose in Texas. I can't preview for you. I don't know yet what they will come back with. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. On the Texas law, has the president been in touch with Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Schumer in the past 2 days about their efforts to pass legislation protecting abortion rights?
He does intend to talk with them about this. I can't tell you exactly when that will be, but he has every intention to do that. I will note that Speaker Pelosi also put out a statement about the intention to bring up the codification of Roe up for a vote, which is something the president certainly supports and would be eager to sign into law.
Tough day in Texas. A lot of you have reached out to me to share with me how sad and frustrated and angry and disappointed you are, and I just want to tell you I feel the same way. SB 1, the anti-voter bill, passed the legislature yesterday. It's on its way to Governor Abbott's desk for signature. It's going to make it even harder to vote in a state that was already the toughest in which to vote and register in the country. Today also marks the first day of enforcement of the anti-abortion, anti-women's health care bill, basically creating a $10,000 bounty for people to report women who are trying to access health care in the state of Texas. And you can now in this state carry a gun publicly without any kind of background check, registration, or vetting. So yes, we're angry, but let's channel that anger into action and get organized. Help me to register the voters who will make the difference in 2022. Click that link below and join the effort. Thanks.
Well, again, I want to thank the leaders who are at this table. You are national leaders. And at this moment, and for a long time, you have been leading on an issue that represents the voices of so many who deserve to be heard, deserve to be seen, and whose rights must be protected. And particularly their constitutional rights and their right to dignity in making their own choices about their personal health care. So I want to thank you all for being here today. We are going to have a robust and a candid conversation about what's going on in our country, and in particular what just recently happened in Texas. But I will repeat what I know you all know. The President and I are unequivocal in our support of Roe v. Wade and the constitutionality of Roe v. Wade and the right of women to make decisions for themselves with whomever they choose about their own bodies. And needless to say, the right of women to make decisions about their own bodies is not negotiable. The right of women to make decisions about their own bodies is their decision. It is their body. And no legislative institution has the right to circumvent the Constitution of the United States in an attempt to interfere with, much less to prevent, a woman to make those decisions. So we will have a conversation about how what is happening in Texas is affecting women in Texas. But as we know, it's not only Texas where this is happening. I know we're going to talk about Mississippi. We're going to talk about New Mexico. We're going to talk about the United States and what we must do collectively, all of us, to protect the women of our country and protect their constitutional rights. All of this, again, is in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling as it relates to the Texas law, which is essentially an abortion bounty law, empowering vigilantes with a private right of action to interfere with a woman's relationship with her healthcare providers. The Supreme Court has allowed a state law to stand that deputizes citizens, anyone, to proclaim themselves in a position to have a right under law to interfere with those choices that that woman has made. Today, however, the United States Department of Justice has spoken loudly in saying that this law is patently unconstitutional and that the United States Department of Justice is prepared to take action and to sue, understanding that what Texas has done is a violation of the United States Constitution. Today also, our Gender Policy Council, the leaders of whom are here, will talk as part of this conversation about the whole of government approach that our administration is taking to protect women and to protect healthcare providers and all those who have the best interest in protecting the constitutional rights of women, so that we can ensure that to the extent we are able to elevate the voices and protect constitutional rights, that we are doing everything within our power as an administration to get that done. And on the point about Texas, this is not a one-off. It's not the only state that is doing this. Right now there are 22 states that have laws that could be used to restrict the legal status of abortion. 22. 90 provisions that restrict access to reproductive health care were passed in 2021. 90 provisions. Some states, like Kentucky and Mississippi, have only one abortion clinic. And we will talk about what that has meant, not only to the healthcare professionals and the residents of those states, but also the impact to neighboring states and healthcare professionals from neighboring states. And today, I simply want to talk also about what happens when we do the right thing, which is to provide all people with access to healthcare. Because we made a statement a long time ago that we agree that it is a human right, should be thought of as a civil right for all people to have access to health care, regardless of their gender, regardless of their status, regardless of where they live. And so when we move closer to our national goal of women's full participation in our nation, including ensuring that all women have access to health care, including reproductive health care, I believe we will be a stronger nation. I believe we will be closer to what we say we hold as an ideal, which is all people are equal and should be treated that way, including their access to essential services. So for me, this is truly an issue that is about full participation. And in that way, we know that when all people are able to fully participate, our democracy is stronger and everyone benefits. And in that way, this issue connects to everyone. When people are able to design their lives in a way that they can determine their own futures, we are a stronger democracy and we are a stronger nation. When people are able to make choices without government interference for themselves in terms of their well-being and the well-being of their family in consultation with whomever they may choose, we are a stronger society. So it is with that spirit that we will have this conversation now. And again, I want to thank the leaders who are at this table, because you are on the ground doing this work every day, and there are a whole lot of folks looking to you for confidence, for support, and looking to you, hoping that we as a country understand that they are rightfully entitled to dignity and protection under the law, as we have declared in our United States Constitution should be the right of all people. So with that, I thank you, and we'll begin our conversation.
Madam Vice President, what are some of the immediate steps that this administration can take to combat this law? Because as you know, litigation can take years. Is there any legislation that this administration supports? And then as the first woman vice president, is this an issue that you want to take ownership over? Would you like to add this to your portfolio?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, this is an issue that I've been, along with so many other leaders, including the leaders at this table, been a strong advocate for, which is the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not to have anybody interfere with her ability and her right to make that decision. On the issue of laws, the President has said, I have said, and I will repeat myself, we need to codify Roe v. Wade. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, Governor, that was a great speech, and your passion and your commitment and your leadership on this issue is unparalleled. You will be the greatest governor in our lifetime to fight for women's reproductive freedom. So thank you so much, Governor, for your leadership on this. I want to recognize my colleague in Congress, Congresswoman Maloney, who has spent her career working for women's reproductive freedom. It means something, and we are grateful for your leadership. I want to recognize everyone else here standing with us, along with all the electeds that are in the audience. I've never been to an event where all the electeds are in the audience, ever. So I want to thank you. And if you want to stand up here because you want to be in the picture, please do. You are always welcome to stand in any picture ever. But it says something. It says something that every person here, every aspect of our government, our city council members to our state senators, every single elected leader in this community cares. They care about women. They care about transgender women. They care about reproductive services. They care about our basic civil rights and human rights. And that is what we're here to talk about. It is our basic human rights. It's meaningful that we are standing in this park, that we have Sojourner Truth standing behind us, or she's sitting actually, sitting behind us. And we have Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. These women were so far ahead of their time. Sojourner Truth was the first woman to recognize that there was a duality of women's rights and black rights that made the search and the struggle for black women exponentially harder. You have Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who together decided we are going to fight for women's rights and the right to vote throughout our lifetime. They never saw that right. They did not get to see those rights. And so anytime that we as a community feel tired or dispossessed or discouraged, this is a reminder for us. You can work a lifetime, and it is worth working your lifetime, because every struggle that we have today is hopefully a struggle that our children and our children's children do not have to have. But that is where we are in America today. And the forces that want to put America's women back into history, the forces that want to deny women reproductive freedom, basic human rights to decide what they do with their bodies, when they have children, under what circumstances they will have children, and how many children they will have, are being denied to women all across this country. And it is a violation of human rights, undeniably. This Texas decision is abhorrent. I can't imagine a worse decision for women. It does three things that is shocking. First, the governor said so perfectly, 6 weeks is very early. Many young women will not know whether or not they're pregnant at 6 weeks. Second, it deputizes vigilantes to go after you. Anybody in that state has universal standing to go after you and make sure you get prosecuted if you are seeking an abortion or helping someone make a decision. So the third thing it does is it creates a right of action against anyone. You sat with your friend and talked to her about what she wants to do with her future. I can sue you. I can put you in jail. I can make you pay $10,000. It is shocking, shocking what they did in Texas. And Texas isn't alone. Texas is just the first big idea that these conservative legislators have all throughout America. We have another lawsuit that's being filed that is extremely dangerous in Mississippi. Mississippi, the Supreme Court will hear a case on the Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban that is a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade. And you have creative lawyers all across the country. The New York Times had an article about it yesterday, who have spent their lives figuring out what lawsuit, what can I file to get to the Supreme Court to eradicate women's reproductive freedom. And it's more than just this question of when you should have access to care. They want to deny women their humanity. And this is what's so frustrating. They want to make sure that women and transgender people are second-class citizens because they want to take away these fundamental decision-making capabilities. It's as simple as that. Imagine taking away 51% of the population's decision about what kind of health care to seek and when to seek it and what treatments are appropriate for you. It's unconscionable. So on the federal level, my job and Carolyn's job is to pass the Women's Health Protection Act. This would basically codify Roe v. Wade. It would tell these state legislators and governors across the country that it is not their purview to make these decisions. Now, to get that done, that is going to be very hard because we may have to have filibuster reform before we pass it in the Senate. I fully support filibuster reform to pass reproductive freedom in the U.S. Senate. We also have to continue our struggle to repeal the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment is what makes it unfair for low-income women. So it tells people, oh, sure, you still have abortion protections, but not if you don't have the money for it. Not if you don't have the resources, not if you don't have the ability to pay. And that's what's so unconstitutional about the Hyde Amendment. It determines who has access based on how much money you have. And so our job in the Senate and the House is to make sure we repeal Hyde. And last, our job is to lift up your voices, to make sure that every single person here who cares deeply about these rights can be heard. And we will, every single one of us here, not stop fighting until every person has the freedom to make the decisions she wants for her future. It's about our bodies, it's about our liberty, it's about our civil rights, and it is about our fundamental human rights. You want to introduce the next one, Robin?
Robin Chappelle Goldston.
Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield to one of the original co-sponsors of this legislation, the gentlelady from Massachusetts, Ms. Presley. 1 minute.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, abortion care is a fundamental human right. Texas's unconscionable abortion ban is further evidence that lawmakers who aim to do harm will stop at nothing to attack our reproductive rights and bodily autonomy, but not on our watch. It's clear the Supreme Court is no longer on the side of justice, and the pro-choice majority of the House of Representatives has a responsibility to stand in the gap and to act. Today we must and we will pass the Women's Health Protection Act. I'm proud to co-lead this bill with Congresswoman Chu to codify the right to abortion care. I urge my colleagues to stand with us to affirm reproductive justice and protect this fundamental right. Thank you. I yield.
Gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Open up, O heavens, and pour out your righteousness. Let the earth open wide so salvation and righteousness can sprout up together.
recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Continuing to stand, celebrating life, I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm now very pleased to yield to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Garcia. 30 seconds.
Ms. Garcia, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Congress must protect women's constitutional freedom to decide over their bodies. After the cruel Texas, my home state, abortion ban, I visited the local Planned Parenthood and heard horrific stories of women already resorting to self-help, including finding an abortion tea on the internet. We cannot go back to the dark ages of using dangerous wire hangers for self-help and other things that will actually hurt and potentially kill women. We cannot continue to go back. We must move forward and protect our rights. I urge passage of the Women's Health Protection
Gentlewoman's
Act.
time has
I
expired.
yield back.
The gentlewoman from Colorado reserves. Ms. Lee, the gentlewoman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong support of H.R. 3755. And as co-chair of the Pro-Choice Caucus, I'm a proud original co-sponsor, and I want to thank my good friend and Congresswoman Judy Chu for her persistent leadership. Also, Chair Pallone and the Speaker for bringing it to the floor. Make no mistake, people deserve the freedom to control their own bodies, lives, and futures. We must protect the right to access abortion to ensure that it is available and affordable. Now, I remember the days of back alley, unsafe abortions. We cannot and we will not go back to those days. Passing this bill will provide a critical safeguard against attacks on reproductive freedom and ensure that abortions are accessible and available for all, which means also low-income women and people of color.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
This is our body, it is our choice.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds now to the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, the gentlewoman from Connecticut.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, let me be clear. Everyone, everywhere should have the freedom to make their own personal health care decisions without interference from politicians. When the Supreme Court allowed the most restrictive abortion law in the nation to go into effect in Texas, they made it clear that they cannot be trusted to protect the constitutional right to an abortion. That is why the Congress must act, as other states are moving to follow suit. That is why Democrats are fighting to protect a woman's right to choose. That is why we have removed the restrictive hide language from all of our appropriations bill. It is time to trust women, to respect their decisions. Health care is not political, not negotiable.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the chairman for yielding. This is a serious issue. Some would say it's an issue about freedom, about individual integrity, as to who make choices. I hear a lot about freedom, about government not interfering. Madam Speaker, millions of women across our country and the men who stand with them are in shock and outrage at the new law in Texas and the Supreme Court's refusal to block it from taking effect. Texas Senate Bill 8 bans any abortion after 6 weeks. That is, of course, before most women know that they're pregnant. It includes no exceptions for rape or incest. What do you think the psychological impact on the health of a woman is if you don't think this is about the health of women? As many as 90% of women seeking reproductive care in Texas do so after 6 weeks, meaning that this law effectively bans women in the state from accessing the full range of reproductive care that they are guaranteed under Roe v. Wade. Now, my presumption is, of course, most speaking against this are not for and didn't support and would like to see repealed Roe v. Wade. Also deeply disturbing is the way Senate Bill 8 is enforced. The law gives any private individual the authority to police any of their fellow citizens whom they suspect may be providing for or receiving reproductive care. How draconian, how communistic, how authoritarian such a scheme is. This vigilante system is at odds with the values of American democracy, reminiscent of the kind of tactics previously used behind the Iron Curtain and still employed by totalitarian regimes. The bill before us today would enshrine in statute the rights women are guaranteed under Roe v. Wade, that the majority of Americans support at a time when they are increasingly under attack. Statistics released in June by the Guttemacher Institute showed that over 500 bills restricting women's health care access had already been introduced since the start of this year in state legislatures. And as of last month, nearly 100 of those had been enacted. The policies enacted by SB 8 and similar measures in other states under Republican control not only have the effect of eliminating access to reproductive choice, but also to a range of life-saving health care services for women, particularly for low-income women. This will probably not affect many wealthy women who can get in their car or get on the airplane and go wherever they might go. So this is opposition to this directly discriminatory to women of less means to their health care. These range from cancer screenings to prenatal visits, from treating injuries to referring patients to counseling after trauma like sexual assault. According to the Center for Reproductive Rights, nearly 90% of American counties do not have a single reproductive care provider. For many women, the health clinics that provide these services are their primary source of health care. Measures like SB 8 are forcing many of these clinics to shut down. Our country ought to be working to expand these resources for women, not make the health care harder to access. We know that SB 8 and similar laws being enacted across the country will not stop women from seeking the full range of reproductive care. You know that. Back to the hangar, perhaps, and the death of scores, thousands, perhaps, of women who see no alternative. The Women's Health Protection Act is a necessary response to Republicans' efforts to make it harder for women to access health care across the country. Thank you, Judy Chu, for leading this effort. And I'm grateful for Congresswoman Chu's authoring this legislation and championing this cause. I'm the father of 3 daughters, the grandfather of 2 granddaughters, and the great-grandfather of 3 great-granddaughters. I frankly do not want any of us making decisions for their health care. Democrats are committed to taking action to secure Roe v. Wade and to protect women's access to reproductive health care no matter where they live. The Women's Health Protection Act is a critical step in securing that ability for millions of American women, and I urge my colleagues to support it and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield to the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath, 30 seconds.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Generations of women fought for the right to vote. They fought for a seat in the university classroom, a seat in the boardroom, and a seat in our government. And they fought for the freedom for us to make our own decisions about our bodies. Generations of women secured these gains so that we could build on their efforts toward a just and equitable society. We cannot allow their work to be undone. That's why I'm proud to be vote in favor of the Women's Health Protection Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman yields. The gentlewoman from Colorado reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield to the gentlelady from Washington State, Ms. Jayapal, 30 seconds.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, 1 in 4 women across America have had an abortion. I am one of them. It is a deeply personal choice about control of our own bodies and the consequences of a choice that only we will have to live with. Do not criminalize me and millions of women like me across the country. Do not criminalize those that help us. Let us be clear. The cruel Texas abortion law and decades of efforts to repeal Roe v. Wade are nothing but attempts to control our bodies and our choices. Terminating my pregnancy, Madam Speaker, was not an easy choice for me, but it was my
Gentlewoman's
choice.
time has expired.
It is time to preserve that.
The gentlewoman
for all
from Colorado reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Whitehouse.
May I interject for one moment to ask that the report that we put together, Captured Courts, the Republican Judicial Assault on Reproductive Rights, be entered into the record of the hearing?
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator Hirono. It's not on. Try it now.
Okay, I think it's on now.
Yes.
Thank you. So I want to start with something that the Mississippi Attorney General Lynn Fitch said, because the Supreme Court is going to be hearing the Mississippi case. But the Mississippi Attorney General recently claimed that overturning Roe v. Wade would somehow empower women to pursue careers and raise children. I wanted to see if Ms. Ross Gosgrave, Representative Howard, whether either of you have any comments about that kind of statement, that women will somehow be empowered if Roe v. Wade were overturned.
So today, women are empowered to participate in the economy. I think overturning Roe v. Wade would have the opposite effect of diminishing their ability to work when they want to work, to space their children when they want to space their children. But if there's interest in furthering women's participation in the workforce, there are a range of policies that actually do that, like childcare, for example.
Representative Howard, do you have anything to add?
I would agree with what was just said. The fact is that, as I said in my opening, I came of age before Roe v. Wade, and I'm well aware of the obstacles that women had in making educational and employment choices for themselves if they found themselves pregnant and did not have many options other than to carry that pregnancy to term. It prevented them from their very destinies.
Well, she goes on to say that women will be more empowered because there are numerous laws enacted since Roe addressing pregnancy discrimination, requiring leave time, assisting with child care, and more. I would be really surprised, frankly, if Mississippi provided any of those kinds of programs or protections. For Professor Vladeck, what effects do late-night, unsigned, terse rulings like the one the Supreme Court issued in the Texas case have on judicial transparency and accountability, and how does this affect litigants' strategies and reliance on prior court decisions?
It's a fair question, Senator, and I think the tricky part is we don't know. So we have rulings that the Supreme Court hands down that have no majority opinion. I cite a couple of them in my testimony, and then lower courts read them one way or the other, and the Supreme Court chastises the lower courts that they think read the unexplained ruling wrong. And so I think that's, it's, again, just to sort of respond a bit to Senators Lee and Cruz, the shadow docket is not new, the emergency docket is not new. What is new is how much more the court is doing with it and how much it's expecting Senator, parties, lower courts, all of us to understand what these cryptic rulings mean.
Have you done a sort of an analysis of the kind of decisions that this Supreme Court is making using the shadow docket process? Well, it's not even a process.
Yeah, I mean,
that were decided?
I realize that my written statement's pretty long, but on page 5, there's a chart that actually documents how many more of these rulings granting emergency relief there have been in the last couple terms. This term, there were 20. That's the most that I've tracked for as long as the court has been deciding these cases as a full court. The average during the first 10 years of Chief Justice Roberts' tenure was about 5.
So I understand that. I'm sorry to I'm running out of time, but basically, I want to know if there is any kind of an ideological thing going on with the use of the shadow docket.
Yeah, I mean, they've been, so yes, I mean, I think the shadow docket rulings have been far more homogeneously ideological than the merits docket. Just one example, Senator, there were, I believe, 69 rulings on the shadow docket this term, from which at least one justice dissented. There was not a single one where a justice to the right of the Chief Justice joined a justice to the left. These are all breaking down on what we might call the classic ideological grounds.
And we see a lot more of these kinds of orders after the 3 Supreme Court justices, President Trump's justices. I just have one question for Representative Howard. Does Texas have any other laws where enforcement of the law is left to vigilantes and $10,000 in bounty money for them?
Does it have any other law that does that? Is that what you're asking me?
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, were you asking me, does that apply to any other?
Does Texas have any other laws besides this law where they actually let bounty hunters go out and enforce the laws?
This is the only one I'm aware of.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it was a scheme to get around a judicial review and to ensure that whether it was ever followed through with or not, there would be this immediate chilling effect, which has occurred, where basically abortions are not being provided because of the fear of the liability. It achieved the purpose, I think, that was intended.
Do you think Texas would ever have a similar law where you can go after people who own guns and let the private sector, let private citizens enforce going after people who own guns and you get $10,000? Do you think Texas would ever enact such a law?
Those kinds of scenarios have been suggested. I have a hard time imagining Texas enacting that particular one.
I think that's a rhetorical question at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Chairwoman, Congresswoman Chu, you are now recognized for your testimony. Congresswoman Chu.
Chair Maloney, Ranking Member Comer, and members of the committee, I want to thank you for holding today's important hearing in which we've heard so many moving stories. I'm here to talk about the hardship faced by individuals who cannot access their full range of reproductive health options due to burdensome state laws, and how we can help thanks to my bill that passed the House last week, H.R. 3755, the Women's Health Protection Act. Everyone deserves equal access to comprehensive and safe reproductive health care, no matter where they live, free from political interference. But anti-abortion extremists have been working ever since the passage of Roe versus Wade to put abortion services out of reach for as many Americans as possible. Texas's SB 8 is just the latest example. The Texas law is egregious and downright chilling. It deputizes vigilantes to harass anyone helping someone obtain an abortion, from a doctor to clinic staff to an Uber driver. And it prohibits abortions at 6 weeks before most even know that they are pregnant. But it is not an outlier. Since 2011, anti-abortion extremists have introduced nearly 500 of these restrictive state laws. For instance, they've had mandatory ultrasounds, waiting periods, or funerals for fetuses, all meant to shame people who access abortion care, while needless requirements like wider doors or hospital admitting privileges are meant to make it harder for a doctor to be able to practice medicine, forcing them to close their doors or turn away patients. None of these restrictions make abortion care safer, and instead impose an undue hardship on those seeking an abortion. This is a coordinated nationwide strategy to eliminate abortion access and provide an opportunity to overturn or undermine Roe. In 2019 alone, 18 states passed 46 laws restricting or banning abortion, including Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, Louisiana, Ohio, and Alabama. The result is that abortion access is often determined by an individual's zip code. Nearly 90% of American counties are without a single abortion provider, and 6 states are down to their last abortion clinic. No constitutional right should be contingent on where you live. My bill, the Women's Health Protection Act, will put a stop to these state-based attacks and enshrine the protections of Roe into law by ensuring that providers have the right to provide and patients have the right to receive abortion free of medically unnecessary restrictions. The Women's Health Protection Act will ensure that no matter where someone lives, no matter their zip code, abortion access is a right for all. Weakening or overturning Roe poses a threat to our fundamental rights to make a personal decision beyond abortion, including who to have intimate relationships with, who to marry, and whether to use contraception. That's why I'm so proud that last week the House took the historic step of passing the legislation. And in fact, it was the first affirmative abortion rights vote in nearly 25 years. And it shows the American people that we will not abandon them. The Supreme Court has announced its intention to hear Jackson Women's Health Organization versus Dobbs, a case that directly challenges Roe versus Wade this December. The Mississippi ban threatens abortion providers with severe penalties for providing abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. It defies nearly 50 years of Supreme Court precedent going back to Roe that recognizes that the Constitution guarantees each person the right to decide whether to continue a pregnancy. There is no path for the Supreme Court to uphold Mississippi's ban without overturning Roe's core holding that every pregnant person has the right to decide whether to continue their pregnancy prior to viability. Abortion restrictions are part of the intertwined systems of oppression that deny Black, Indigenous, and people of color their constitutional rights. The people most hurt by these restrictions are those who already face barriers to health care. I'm pleased to say that Senate Majority Leader Schumer has announced his intention to bring WIPA to the Senate floor for a vote so we can ensure that regardless of what happens at the Supreme Court, women are free to make decisions about their lives and bodies in consultation with their families and their physicians, not politicians. Thank you.
Thank all of you for your extremely powerful testimony and for sharing your stories. There will be demonstrations across the country this weekend where women following your leadership will share their stories. I am grateful for your being here today and for your dedication to helping other people. The panel is now excused, and we will pause for a moment while we get the second panel ready.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Scope, do you believe all Black lives matter?
Of course I do.
You have written that widespread abortion in the Black population has become an acceptable, quotes, acceptable form of racism in the United States today. You wrote, clearly, this quote, clearly abortion has disproportionately affected the Black community, leading to a decrease in their population numbers, as well as many adverse consequences to women and children. Many of the pathologies, your word, affecting the Black community can be at least partially attributed to the breakdown in families and the absence of paternal involvement facilitated by abortion. Mental health complications in Black women leading to deaths of despair can be caused by abortion. Could you explain to me what your expertise and familiarity is with Black families?
Well, I have a niece and a nephew that are both Black.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Scope. Turning now to Professor Murray, how would you respond to this argument?
So thank you so much for the question. The purported links between abortion and the eugenics movement is a subject of my own scholarship. I recently published a paper in the Harvard Law Review outlining the ways in which this narrative of abortion as eugenics is being used to advance race-based grounds for overruling Roe versus Wade. And the increased interest in this narrative can be traced to Justice Clarence Thomas's 2019 concurrence in Box versus Planned Parenthood of Indiana and Kentucky. There, Justice Thomas attempted to graft abortion to the history of the eugenics movement in the United States. Unfortunately, the history upon which he relied to do so was woefully incomplete. Justice Thomas was correct to note that in the 1920s and 1930s, the United States was in the grips of eugenics fervor and its concomitant interests in racial purity and white supremacy. However, in advancing those interests in racial purity, the eugenicists did not rely on abortion. Rather, their efforts were channeled into bans on interracial marriage, immigration laws that kept certain ethnic minorities out of this country, and most importantly for our purposes, forcible and coercive sterilization of those with so-called weak or deleterious genes. These sterilization laws were later repurposed and redirected in the 1960s toward poor women who were receiving public assistance. So this is all to say that sterilization, rather than abortion, was the eugenicists' preferred means of reproductive control. And to the extent that abortion figured into this eugenic fervor at all, it was in the effort to compel native-born white women to reproduce in greater numbers. In the period following the Civil War, there was considerable anxiety about the changing demographic character of this country. White middle-class women were using contraception and abortion to limit their families to manageable sizes, while immigrant women were having babies in record numbers. Fearing the replacement of native-born whites by immigrants, policymakers sought to reverse the trend among white women by enacting criminal bans on abortion throughout this country. And then finally, I will just note that some of the members of this committee are among the 14 House Republicans who voted against making Juneteenth a federal holiday. When you fail to take even this modest step to acknowledge the Black experience in this country, it is very difficult to take seriously your claims that your support of flagrantly unconstitutional abortion restrictions are animated by concern for Black women and our children.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon, is recognized for 5 minutes.
September 18, 2021. Ask unanimous consent to submit these into the record.
Without objection, Ms. Bush.
St. Louis, and I thank you, Chairman, for convening this hearing today. My plea today is with my colleagues on this committee and with the American public watching. Take a walk in the shoes of an 18-year-old girl from St. Louis, a Black girl, a girl who is uninsured and suffering from asthma, a health condition she likely got from the burning of fossil fuels in her community. She can't afford rent. She works a minimum wage job, and her friends consider her fortunate because at least she has a job. But even in this job, she is making less than her white counterparts. She is also 9 weeks pregnant, feeling alone and afraid. That girl is me. We don't live in a world that nurtures and cares for Black girls like me. And if the world doesn't care about a Black girl like me, then what will happen to our Black babies who grow up to become Black children and Black adults? Professor Bridges, you talk about the high mortality rates among Black pregnant people. In a world in which Roe is overturned, what harms do abortion bans pose for Black pregnant people?
We will be coercing them to give birth, which is a dangerous proposition, which is something that should be embarrassing to the United States. The United States it's actually the only industrialized nations that has a maternal mortality rate that is increasing. The racial disparities in maternal mortality mean that 3 to 4 times as many Black people should expect to die while attempting a birth. And so to coerce birth, which is what abortion bans and regulations do, is to coerce Black people to engage in a task that is dangerous to them.
Thank you, Professor Bridges. Let me ask you another question. Some scholars have compared this bounty system to the Fugitive Slave Acts, laws that offered a bounty for capturing and returning fugitive slaves and provided for fines up to $1,000 against anyone who helped a fugitive enslaved person. I agree. Can you describe the white supremacist roots that link SB 8 and the Fugitive Slave Acts?
Absolutely. So the Fugitive Slave Act is a effort to ensure that people of color, Black people specifically, were human property, and that chattel slavery as an institution would be perpetuated, and that the people who purported to own those Black people would not lose their property. And so essentially, the Fugitive Slave Act allowed others to control the bodies, private actors, right, to control the bodies of other human beings. That is precisely what is happening in Texas today, in deputizing private citizens to seek a bounty on other private citizens. We are allowing private citizens to control, terrorize, regulate the bodies of other human beings.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that, Professor Bridges. Dr. Moayedi, SB 8 has been law for 64 days, and in those 64 days, clinics have closed and certain resources have been permanently erased. What are the permanent impacts of SB 8 on people of color and people living in poverty?
Thank you for that question. And Representative Bush, thank you again for sharing your story. It moves me and every single time, and it is the core of why I provide this care. When I first started working in abortion care and realized the desperate need for women of color to take care of other women of color, that is what inspired me to become a physician and to provide abortion care in Texas. So this issue is very dear to my heart. This ban is disastrous for communities of color, especially the ones that I serve. Many of the people I take care of have never left the North Texas area. So traveling to Oklahoma City even is very challenging for them. Last week, I took care of someone from the coast area in Texas that was coming to Oklahoma City, but because they had never left the state either, their friend made them a reservation in a hotel in Tulsa instead of Oklahoma City because they didn't really understand where to go. And so that's just one small story of how challenging and insurmountable getting out of the state for care can be. What is truly frightening for me is what we're going to see in the next 7 to 8 months as far as maternal mortality in the communities that I serve. Yes.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. What I want to make clear here today, as the first Black woman and nurse to serve the people of Missouri in Congress, is that the path to overturning Roe will be devastating for all people, especially Black people. Abortion care will still exist like it did before this landmark decision, but it will be deadly. In a world where Black pregnant people die 4 times more often than white pregnant people during childbirth, in a world where Black women are disproportionately evicted from their homes, in a world where Black trans women are more likely to turn to sex work for survival, failing to legislate reproductive justice is a death sentence for our neighbors, our co-workers, our families. We cannot afford to go back on our reproductive rights. We must legislate love. We must legislate justice for Black girls and non-binary folks and guarantee reproductive rights for everyone. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. This concludes today's. Ms. Ross.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to the witnesses for your patience and for your dedication to the women of Texas and the women of this country. I want to start with a couple of quotes from Justice Ginsburg. I know our chairman started, but I think it's a nice way to remind us of why we're here today and why this Texas law is so pernicious. I want to remind the committee of what Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote in her 2007 dissent in Gonzalez versus Carhart. Legal challenges to undue restrictions on abortion procedures do not seek to vindicate some generalized notion of privacy. Rather, they center on a woman's autonomy to determine her life's course and thus to enjoy equal citizenship stature. Justice Ginsburg argued this point in her 1993 Senate confirmation hearing as well, explaining that the decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life, her well-being and her dignity. It's a decision she must make for herself, and when the government controls that decision for her, she is being treated less than as a fully adult human responsible for her own choices. This holds true today, and these same issues are under threat, and women are under threat. Senate Bill 8 is appalling for many reasons, including its unconstitutionality and the deputization of private citizens as bounty hunters. But our focus must be on the simple fact that this is a law that hurts women. In the end, that is the only thing that matters. Forced parenthood threatens a woman's physical and mental health. It restricts our economic freedom. It makes women of color poorer, and in particular, second-class citizens. There's plenty of data that you have shared with us that support these findings. The only proof we really need that this law hurts women come from the stories you've shared today. I want to go back to what we just heard from Dr. Moyadi, and I love the point that you were making, that if we are truly pro-family, then we need to enact policies that make it easier for people who have children to give those children a good life. And that involves the health and health care of women. And in Texas, like in my home state of North Carolina, there has not been Medicaid expansion. That means that women are not able to get critical health care pre-conception and take care of themselves, and also not able to get health services postpartum when they are trying to care for a new baby. And so, Doctor, please share with us how Texas's decision to deputize people to prevent abortions runs contrary to a woman's health when Texas cannot find it in its heart to provide Medicaid to poor women.
Thank you for that question, Representative Ross. You know, it brings to mind a story of a patient I took care of several years ago. This person was a mother of 5 or 6 children. I can't remember anymore at this point, but had several children and had recently had a child as well. And she developed severe heart failure after that pregnancy and was just told, don't become pregnant again, you'll die. Well, in Texas, prior to this last session, your Medicaid expired at 6 weeks. And so there was no way for her to get her cardiac drugs. There was no way for her to get birth control afterwards to keep herself healthy. And of course, she became pregnant again, and continuing that pregnancy would have killed her. And so this person, a mother of many children, struggling to be a good mom, had to scrape together everything to be able to get abortion care so she wouldn't die and leave her children without a parent. I deal with those situations every single week in Texas. We need better healthcare in our state desperately. And that includes removing restrictions to abortion care and expanding Medicaid.
Thank you so much for helping women, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
This case is the first time in 50 years that the court is hearing a case that directly challenges Roe versus Wade. Now, let me tell you, I am one of the 1 in 4 women who have had an abortion. But let me tell you, I remember when abortion was criminalized before Roe versus Wade. But you know what? I survived. Many women did not survive, especially Black women. And so I know personally how devastating the consequences of restrictive abortion laws can be. We cannot and we will not go back to those days. No way. So let's be clear, as you know and say over and over again, abortion is essential. Every person should have the freedom to decide, to control how they want to control their bodies and their lives. These laws affect everyone, but we know that abortion bans have disproportionate impact on Black, Latina, indigenous people, and other people of color. We know that. Also, immigrants, people in rural areas, and people with low income are the most impacted by these restrictions. We know that.
Mr. President, I come to the floor and join my colleague from Washington to support a woman's right to choose and to make sure that we are making our voices heard loud and clear about the discussion that's happening before the Supreme Court and why it's so important to have the full reproductive health care choices for women in the United States of America. In 1973, the Supreme Court decided the Constitution protects a woman's right to privacy and thus the choice to have a safe and legal abortion without excessive government restrictions. And so now that these cases are before the court, it's important for our colleagues to know that the majority of Americans support Roe v. Wade. In my state, in 1970, the people voted to legalize early abortions, and in 1991, by a vote of the people in an initiative process, we supported that, quote, every individual possesses a fundamental right of privacy with respect to personal reproductive decisions, codifying Roe v. Wade into state law. That was in 1991. So it is concerning to people of the state of Washington to hear now that these other states, once coming here to talk about just certain restrictions, are now coming to talk about overturning Roe v. Wade. Women should be allowed to have these fundamental rights, dependent not where they live, but to make sure that they have access. And my colleague from Washington just expressed why it's so important for women and families to have access to those full reproductive rights. Women across the country for 50 years have come to rely on these constitutional protections to make decisions for themselves about their reproduction, their families, and their bodies. That is why it's important to realize that Roe is based on our privacy protections in the Constitution. The justices wisely understood that a woman's right to choose was about privacy, a personal issue, a medical choice, one in which the state had very limited roles, subject to the highest standards and scrutiny of the court. But some of my colleagues believe that it is their choice to make. They believe they should decide for all women. They believe that they should not make the decision for just themselves, but for other people and for other people's family, when to have a child. I know that in Mississippi, legislators have decided that rather than viability after 15 weeks, the state should take the choice away from women. In Texas, the legislature decided that the choice should be taken away at 6 weeks, typically long before a woman might know she is pregnant. Why are these people who claim that they should be making decisions for women across the country now supporting efforts to take away these important rights? The court in Casey said, quote, the proper focus of constitutional inquiry is the group for whom the law is a restriction, not the group for whom the law is irrelevant. But let's look at what happened in Mississippi. In 2018, Mississippi enacted a state law which banned abortion after 15 weeks. Notably, there's no exception for rape or incest, and no exception for the health of the mother. That is that they say that there is their government's choice. Well, I ask them, where is the right of the mother and the individual? Where is the right for that family to ask about the life of the mother? To quote an amicus brief to the court on behalf of over 500 public health professionals, quote, any ban on pre-viability abortion such as Mississippi carries major public health implications because it forces a woman to carry pregnancies to term under adverse circumstances marked by substantially greater increases to their health and that of their families. Any ban, continuing to read from the quote, any ban will disproportionately affect young women, women of color, low-income women, and communities who are already vulnerable to elevated health and social risks and reduce access to necessary health care, end quote. This is what we're talking about, a woman's right to choose, her family's right to choose, and people want to see these rights eroded. I think that these are public health concerns that we all should be concerned about. I think we should be concerned that a legislature wanted to change these laws. In 2018, some in the state legislature may have just had the objective of narrowly undermining Roe, but now they recently are changing their position and are asking that Roe v. Wade be overturned. So all of these are important decisions. As the KC court held, overruling precedent would come, quote, at a cost of profound and unnecessary damage. I couldn't agree more. Because of Roe and Casey, abortions are safe and are available. Women are in control of their bodies. Families can plan. These are important issues for every woman in America. These are their choices. This decision, a very difficult decision, can be theirs and theirs alone. And that is why it is a matter of choice. So I hope our colleagues will be paying close attention to what is happening at the Supreme Court. I guarantee you the people of the state of Washington are, who, as I said, codified Roe v. Wade into statute by a vote of the people. The majority of Americans support Roe v. Wade, and this is now a law that people are trying to overturn and overturn our privacy constitutional rights. I thank the President, and I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Maya Angelou said that when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Mississippi showed us. The state made its intent clear today before the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade, despite 50 years of constitutional precedent that clearly upholds it. This is about politicians controlling people's bodies and decisions. In my 10 years working for Planned Parenthood in the South, I saw exactly who is hurt the most by harmful abortion bans: Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LGBTQ+ communities, people struggling to make ends meet. Without Roe, the threat to abortion is real and far-reaching. Half of U.S. states are poised to ban abortion entirely, including my home state of Georgia. Abortion is essential. We must ensure that everyone, no matter their zip code, has the freedom to make decisions about their health and their families. In the House, we did our part by passing the Women's Health Protection Act. It's time for the Senate to do its job so that we can rightfully keep abortion safe, legal, and accessible. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
Yesterday, the Supreme Court took up a very important issue. I viewed it as as a very dark day as the Supreme Court heard arguments about the case of Mississippi's extreme law. The court is threatening to trample over the Constitution, destroy Roe v. Wade, and take away a woman's freedom to make the most fundamental decision that she can make for herself and her family, working with her family members and her doctor and her faith. And so we have a situation where, for us, we believe the strongest weapon that we have here is to pass the Roe v. Wade codification. We did that already in the House. It establishes statutory right for healthcare providers to provide and women to avail themselves to receive abortion care free from medically unnecessary restrictions. The DOJ and providers and those harmed by restriction made unlawful under the Act could go to court to enforce those rights. It made the law, the Women's Health Protection Act, would protect access to termination of a pregnancy across the country. The codification of Roe, again, codification of Roe is the strongest weapon that we have to blunt these restrictive anti-woman state laws. Now, we don't know what the decision will be from the court, but from what they have said about not respecting precedents, stare decisis, all of that is troubling. And what they have said about, sometimes I think they need a session in the birds and the bees for some of the kinds of statements that they make. I say that as mother of 5, 6 years and 1 week, 5 children. As I say to my colleagues, when you have 5 children in 6 years and 1 week, we can discuss this issue. That was great for me. That's not necessarily great for other people, and it shouldn't be up to any of us to decide what a woman and her family and her husband, her partner decides is right for them and their family and their future childbearing possibilities. So it's scary. It's really scary. And I say that as a practicing Catholic. Again, this shouldn't even be a political issue. Look at Ireland. Is there a more Catholic country? Look at Ireland and how they pass legislation respecting women. So, in any event, any questions?
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you.
Without objection.
Today, the Supreme Court is hearing one of the most important abortion rights cases in generations. The case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, marks the first time in 50 years the court agreed to hear a case on the constitutionality of a pre-viability abortion ban. In other words, the state of Mississippi has asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. Let me be clear. Reproductive health access is a fundamental right. This is about supporting body autonomy and well-being. It's also about economic justice and social freedom. The people hurt most by abortion restrictions and bans are those who already face barriers to getting access to health care: women, people of color, those working to make ends meet, members of the LGBTQI community, immigrants, young people, those in rural communities, and people with disabilities and others. We can look to the state of Texas as a real-life example. Texas has banned almost all abortions in the state, forcing people to travel across state lines to receive care. Now's the time for the Supreme Court to show that it decides cases based on precedent and rule of law, not politics, not ideology. Every person should be free to make the best health care decisions, regardless of where they live. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.